Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another fresh episode of Masters of the Air by Story Archives. I'm your host, Mario Busto, alongside
the other host, Zachary Newton. Welcome back.
I'm keeping you on your toes with the cadence, Zach, to see if you're paying attention or if you're just in cruise control or if you're a smooth operator like Robert Rosenthal in this episode.
Oh, I'm a smooth operator.
It's crazy how this show is taking us from... It's just rotating in these different characters who are now becoming center stage, right? I looked at a little bit of the... We're talking about part 5, of course, because we just watched it a little while ago. I looked at the sneak peek for episode 6, and it's very much focused on Robert Rosenthal, who's a epic figure, becomes kind of the central character in this episode in the last third of it, really. In this whole mission where they're going to bombard and bomb this railroad that's at the center of this city. It's pretty much a suicide mission, really. They send out 17 planes and only one comes back. I'm not saying there's only one plane that survived, because there's definitely lots of survivors, it seems. Except, unfortunately, they're all over enemy territory, including the beloved Bucky Keoghan. So a lot of stuff's going on. We picked up from last episode where Bucky gets the news that Buck is MIA, and we still don't get an answer on if Buck's alive or not. I want to thank all the listeners out there who are commenting out and kind of correcting us on some historical matters. We'll take it. We'll definitely, we're doing the show because we love history. We appreciate World War II history and the veterans who served. So we appreciate any sort of enlightenment that you guys got out there, because we're not the only ones who are enjoying this show. And I got to say, of all the episodes so far in the season, this one felt the most intense. I was on the edge of my seat like the entire time of it. It was very well done. Feels like they're hitting their groove of how to do an air fight and how to build that anticipation with the edit. Yeah. It was just really, really well done. In fact, like there's one scene, and I know I'm going on a lot here. The one scene where it's the last plane standing, really. And they look to their left and there's nobody there. Look to their right, there's nobody there. And then you look straight ahead and there's like what looks like 300 German bombers. Fighter jets coming straight at them, right? What'd you think, Zach? First impressions?
I'll say right now, this has been, I think, my favorite episode of the season. I kind of started off this episode expecting that, I'd like kind of be watching it in the background a little bit. Like I was planning to do some other things, because the first few episodes felt like that to me. Like I still liked the show, but it was like I didn't need to pay super close attention to the entire show. This one I was like, all right, I'm gonna send a couple emails, finish out my workday while I watch the show. And it was just like a few minutes into it, I'm like, all right, close my laptop, I'm into the show, just watching. Focus. Like I couldn't focus on the emails. I don't even think I got one of them out, but
that's happened to me with certain shows sometimes.
This was a top-notch episode for me, compared to the rest of them. I did like the pacing. I completely agree with you there. I was much more I think the thing that I liked about the flight scenes on this was that it wasn't just this long, flying mission to drop bombs in one area, and you're just like flying in a straight line, or what feels like a straight line, trying to shoot it at a bunch of fighter planes coming to you, shooting at you. Like we actually got some like dog fight sort of things going on in this. It's like, all right, let's veer off to the left. Let's take the plane up and try and get a good angle on them. I liked that. Like I kind of wish we saw a little bit more of that, but I mean, I would imagine that they probably didn't fly the bomber planes like that often.
Yeah, I mean, what you got the sense of is that these German planes were kind of just doing loops around these guys. Like they were just looping around them, and then they were rotating and pretty much running through them again, until it came down to 2 fighter jets left. I'm assuming the other ones had to go off and refuel, as we saw that kind of established earlier in the season. But there was 2 stragglers that kept on trying to take down Rosenthal's plane. And so then you see him going to maneuvers like taking the plane on a nosedive, taking it straight up to get the gunner in a position to shoot down on these fighters. And really kind of gives you the feeling that if he hadn't done those maneuvers, they would definitely be, like fish in a barrel, it felt like, right? Yeah. Because it's just, I wrote down, because obviously I'm watching this blind. I didn't do any research prior to, at least I didn't do any research on the Bloody Hundredth prior to watching the series. But I wrote down before it happened when they set it up and it was silent. I don't think there was even music playing, which sometimes adds to the tension. And you see that shot of just the trails of the plane right ahead of Robert Rosenthal's fort, right?
Yeah.
And you see them all. I just wrote one last plane standing, and then I wrote in the next line, but he's a goner. Like there's just no way he's getting out of this. And he maneuvers and finds a way to fight his way out of it, really. And I gotta say, let's stay on Robert here for a second because I got a great message from one of our audience members, Amy, who sent out an interesting little tidbit about Robert, and she sent a link with it too. I had heard the writer of the show, I think John Orloff. I think that's his name. I might be butchering it. He mentioned Rosenthal earlier when I went on our first episode coverage of Masters of the Air. But this guy is a legend. I mean, he flew 52 missions. He's one of the most decorated pilots of the Bloody Hundredth, as they call it. And then after the war, he becomes a lawyer who prosecuted the Nazis at the Nuremberg trials. So this guy is, I don't know where he ranks in terms of key figures in the war, but he's up there in terms of decorated fighters and then decorated after the war to kind of like talk about like a round trip or kind of a bookend to your service, right? Like you're serving in the war successfully, 52 missions. We mentioned that there was no limit on missions, right, at that point, right? I think what was the number I said, Zach? That was
11 was like you beat the average or something like that.
That was like beating the average was 11.
Yeah.
But there was a number that they raised it to. I think it was like 30. Okay. The 30. Okay. 25, I think it was.
Okay.
Because we had Dies celebrating his last mission, which was the 25th mission in episode 4, I believe. So this guy flew 52, so more than double of the necessary amount. And you see it, right? They kind of paint him as very epic, right? He's very calm, cool, collected against, overwhelming odds. And I've seen some movies about the Nuremberg trials, which are pretty interesting. I mean, there's lots of interesting bits that happen after the war where Nazis escaped to Argentina and various countries, and you got people hunting them down, trying to bring them to justice. I would love to see more. I don't know if they'll have enough time in the season to dive deeper into his character, but I know at least next episode we're getting a bit more. And I don't know what's going to happen in terms of our other two main protagonists, Buck and Bucky. We still don't know if Buck's alive. It very much feels like he's dead, to be honest.
It does feel like he's dead. Yeah. Yeah, I don't feel like we haven't gotten any closure on that at all yet. But I mean, I will say though, there was a moment in this episode where I was kind of like, maybe I have a little bit of hope, right? Because we felt like nobody was coming back at some point in this episode. It's just like, okay, nope, here we go. The plane didn't go down and crash. Like, Bucky's just chilling over there in some, I don't know, farmland or something now. And we had planes come back to be like one plane at least made it back after we thought nothing was going to make it back. So
Keoghan is in Westphalia, Germany. I think I read that right on the screen.
Sounds about right.
And who the hell knows what's going to happen to him, because that's about as bad a place as you could land in that time in history. But, then again, speaking about getting no closure, we didn't get closure on Crosby either. And it turns out he was alive. That was one of the key things in this episode, is that Crosby is alive. Yeah. And then he gets promoted to group navigator, which means Bubbles has to go back into the fight, which we can now assume Bubbles is dead, because in the log that they do post mission, they talk about how their fort just blew up and there were no shoots. Yeah. So Bubbles is gone. And it's a sad moment, because he wrote that, how much more of a sober look can you get of somebody's thoughts about you than what they would write about you after you're dead? Right? And you see Bubbles writes that letter to Crosby's wife, and it shows you kind of like the stand-up guy Bubbles was in writing that letter. And it's a really deep scene watching Crosby mourn over Bubbles. So
yeah. No, it really was. But yeah, that's a good point. Crosby coming back was also one of the moments where I was like, maybe Buck, maybe Clevin is alive somewhere. But if I were to put my money on it, I do think he's dead. I don't think he's with us anymore. It just, the show just has that feeling, right?
It does feel though that it's if he were dead, that by now we would have seen at least a closure moment because his character was too centrally involved. Everybody got that closure moment upon their death who's been a main character so far. Even Kurt Biddick's character, right? Played by Barry Keoghan, he gets that moment where you see he's going to die. Mm-hmm. So I would assume that by now we would have had it. So I'm going to guess that he is alive still, albeit probably in enemy territory like Bucky. And so it's not as easy as just getting out of England, so to speak, right? Because Crosby landed in England. That'll be a longer process. In fact, who knows how long it could take, right? But we do know, I think we're still a year prior to D-Day in terms of the timeline of this series, right?
I want to say yes, because I believe this was on the build up to D-Day. They were trying to clear some room, right?
Yeah, this is 1943. So this is a lot of the heavier fighting is occurring at this point too. So there's a lot of moral conundrums that are presented in this episode as well. For example, the fact that their target is a railroad, I think it's a railroad yard, but it's at the center of a city. And so therefore civilians are almost certainly going to die. And you got Crank is one of the characters in the show. He's having a real moral dilemma thinking about the fact that they're going to be killing women and children probably with this bomb. But if anybody's prepared to drop a bomb on Germany right now, it's Bucky, especially not just because Buck is dead, right? But because he just came from London where he saw a woman mourning her daughter being killed. So it's not that it's not wrong. It's not that it's not wrong. It's just that your enemy's going to put their foot on your throat and kill all of your women and children if you don't strike back at them. So it's one of those things where it's war, it's ugly, and Bucky gets to a point where he's just kind of like, are you going to hop on this plane or not? Like, are you going to fight today or not? It's war. Like, well, what do you expect? Like, this is what happens. Like, terrible stuff happens in war. Like, if in the scenario that they said, hey, like, let's say everybody took a moral high ground, like, hey, we can't bomb this place because civilians are going to die, then Germany wins the war. And that's just the bottom line.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I would say Bucky also had a really interesting line during, I think, the scene that you're talking about, where the guy's just like, yeah, but women and children, they might die. He's like, this is war. We're here to drop bombs. Just like it was kind of like a mic drop moment from him. But it's interesting to see like that pivot in his character. Like, I think last episode and this episode were, I think, have been very prominent for Bucky and kind of seeing his character develop. I mean, he's kind of like, I don't know. I mean, he feels like he's on a path for revenge and this whole thing. And I was a little worried during this episode, like it was going to come too easy. I'm like, it's not going to come too easy. Like something's going to happen. And well, his plane goes down. He has to, parachute down into farmland.
Well, for these guys, I'm like on the opposite, where you kind of just want there to be an easy mission because they fly every single mission in broad daylight. Yeah. And, but I had the sense that maybe he might be reckless in seeking the revenge that he wanted. So there's that. But another thing, he said he wanted to pitch last episode, but he did not fly in this episode once again. So I don't think we're ever seeing Bucky fly a plane.
Well, I mean, he's definitely not flying it from here on out unless he hijacks one to come back home. Yeah. I mean, he is kind of a hothead. Like, I'm not going to lie. So, I mean, I would imagine people don't really want him flying.
He is, but he doesn't really lose sense ever of responsibility. So it's like one of those things, I was watching, who was I watching? I was listening to a basketball podcast and they were talking about, it was Jason Williams, who's known as White Chocolate. He's like one of the most flashy point guards. He used to play for the Miami Heat in the 2006 championship winning team. And he was on the OG podcast with Udonis Haslem, who's like a local legend, Miami Heat legend in South Florida. And they're talking about like all these organizations, how that there's varying class of professionalism across the NBA, like you would imagine, right? And how he was comparing the Memphis Grizzlies. He said the Memphis Grizzlies had like the most, it was pretty unprofessional, their organization compared to the Heat. And he was talking about a specific coach. He was saying like that the great coaches, they didn't care what you did outside of practice as long as it didn't affect the team. Mm-hmm. And it didn't adversely affect like your family or something like that. So these guys, I mean, they would, these guys are smoking weed and partying and doing stuff, and they're professional athletes. I mean, they're young, so they're living the fast life.
Yeah.
And they were pretty much talking about how, like, what do you care what he does, like, outside of practice, if it doesn't affect the team, if he's showing up early to practice, like, that's their business, right? It's kind of the same thing here with Bucky, right? Like, yeah, Bucky's is crazy in terms of, like, yeah, he likes to drink, he likes to party, all this stuff, but if he's effective as a major and as a leader, then it really doesn't matter what he does on his own personal time. So that's kind of my point of he doesn't really lose sight of responsibility and his to the point where he doesn't even jump off the plane first. Like, he's determined to be the leader that he is supposed to be at the major rank.
Yeah. And I like that about him. I recognize that as well. Like, he does show up. Or at least he sure seems to show up. He wants to be in the field. He wants to be going out on these missions. I mean, I'm hoping that he ends up pulling through. I would imagine he would. I find it hard to believe that we would lose two of the central characters within this show, but I mean, time will tell.
Possible. And we know Apple TV, man. Also,
yeah,
this isn't fictional, so it's if it's history, it's history.
Yeah, and I'm intentionally not looking it up because I don't want to spoil it for me. Like that would be annoying. Yeah.
Like, some people comment, and they're the ones who kind of have no tact at all, who are like, you guys don't know your history at all. Like, well, we're intentionally going into it blind. We could easily look up the bloody 100th and read for hours tonight on what occurred there, and that's something that I'll do after I finish the show. But before then, I don't want to know what's happening. I don't think it makes for good podcasting for me to pretend like I don't know what's going to occur.
Doesn't make for good show watching to know everything that's going to occur. It would just take all the fun away from it.
Yeah, another reason why I'm not really into prequels, by the way. Although I have two exceptions on prequels.
Okay.
Better Call Saul is incredible.
Oh, it is great.
And House of the Dragon, which, since you're deep in your Game of Thrones run, in fact, I had to rip you away from Game of Thrones to record this podcast tonight.
Yeah, I'm a little salty.
Kind of. Not really rip you away, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You know how good that show is. And I'm assuming you're going to just jump straight to House of the Dragon after you finish Game of Thrones.
100% I am. Like, I also want to say, like, I have watched the first episode of House of the Dragon. I watched it when the show first came out. I just never ended up finishing it. I don't know, my HBO Max plan expired or whatever the case is, but I'm into it now. Like, I'm going straight to that next. So hopefully a couple more weeks and I'll be there.
It's good. They also just announced that they greenlit, or they didn't greenlight it, but they have it in development. I'm assuming by now you know who Aegon is.
I believe so.
Okay, so there's a King Aegon in Game of Thrones, and he has a conquest. So they're doing a show on Aegon's conquest of,
like another spinoff
of Westeros. It's
okay. All right.
So that's why Game of Thrones is awesome. Though you can't beat the world building and just the family lineage of Game of Thrones and just like the interesting history of it all. It's really
I get why everybody talks about it though, like all the time. Yeah. Like it is a very, very binge-worthy show. And you and I were talking about it just before we hopped on this. Like, yeah, I am starting to notice things in culture and just random places that I've never realized. I'm like,
what was it that you were telling me about your favorite coffee shop?
One of my favorite coffee shops is called Maine Coffee, and they're over in Boca, and the logo of the coffee shop. I was watching one of the episodes. I'm not going to say who, but they were walking through a market, and there's like this little tag that was shown on screen for had to have been half a second. And I'm like, oh my God, I know that. I was like thinking about it for a second. I'm like, it's the main and it looks so similar. It's crazy. So I've got to go talk to them. I'm gonna be like, not yet. I'm gonna message a buddy of mine.
You should
that
play.
Works
you should
there.
play
And I'll be
dumb.
like, hey.
You should play dumb like you don't know where it's from. And be like, man, what was the inspiration behind the logo? Yeah. And just to see if they tell the truth.
Yeah, I'm very curious. I actually know the designer, or I should say know of the designer. I'm not very close with him. That designed the logo and did all the branding. So
maybe he just plagiarized it.
I might hit him up at some point and be like, yo, where'd you get the idea for this
from? Maybe he just stole it, bro.
I love it. But no, it's so awesome to kind of see that in the real world. It's pretty neat.
The views expressed by the host do not represent that of Soapbox Network. Um, just kidding. All right, let's continue onward here. We have, at this point, setting the stage of what's going on. I would love to know after this episode how effective the mission was in derailing the Germans.
Yeah.
From a railroad standpoint, transportation, all that stuff. I would love to know where we are in the scope of the war, how effective these guys have been.
Yeah.
We have an ongoing situation with Bucky in Germany, presumably trying to escape enemy territory. We also have, what's the name of the kid who was in Quinn? We got Quinn and co trying to escape France, I believe, right?
Mhm.
Or Belgium.
Yeah, I think it's Belgium.
Yeah, I just couldn't remember if they went from Belgium to France after to get out of there. But, you know, I'm assuming we'll get back to that storyline at some point in the season. We have the question mark on Buck. And then we got a new character, Rosenthal, who seems to get like the Bucky weekend pass in the next episode. And he's going to like this place that kind of looks like Downton Abbey, which is interesting because if you ever watched Downton Abbey, I don't know if every single royal house in England, like there's a lot of royalty families in England, right? That have that in their lineage, or they have like your barons and blah, 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 whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot.
Well, in Downton Abbey, the show, they open their house to become like an infirmary for veterans to come in. So it's kind of interesting. And the property kind of looked like the house. So that would be an interesting crossover. Although Downton Abbey, I believe, is completely fictional. I mean, I'm almost 99.999.
I don't know, man. Like there's too much with royalty over there. It's hard to keep up
fictional.
with.
It's fictional.
All right. Fair enough. Probably loosely based on
historical
real
fiction.
things. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like exactly. Kind of like Peaky Blinders, right? Where
Peaky Blinders is real. Well, I mean,
they were a real
fictional.
gang, but there wasn't like a Thomas Shelby,
exactly.
who was a pronounced figure. You know.
Yeah,
So,
that's true. Very true.
Yeah. All right, so let's get into some categories, Zach.
All right. Well, let's get into best scene.
Unless you have closing thoughts before we get into these.
I mean, I am really looking forward to seeing Rosie, continue into the show. Like he's kind of stealing it for me. Like I really like he feels like the Cleven replacement. Right?
He does.
He's very chill. He's got his head on his shoulders. He doesn't feel like he's trying to be cool.
No, he's just being himself.
So yeah, I like it. Like I really like his character. I am excited to kind of see what goes on in the next few episodes. But yeah, man, he just kind of came into this show like a badass. I don't really know how it's to put that, but
no, it's spot on.
Great episode. It's got me gearing up for the next one. Favorite scene?
That's kind of easy. It's got to be just the last standoff of Rosie's plane versus the freaking German fighters.
Yeah, the dog fight. That is definitely
that's the winner.
That's definitely what got it for me.
Chicken dinner.
Oh yeah. How about favorite character of the episode?
Again, it's got to be Rosie. I think.
Yeah, he's the best. He's the best new guy on the block. Like, and he was standout. Like, Bucky.
He had a good one too. Bucky had a good one too.
Yeah,
but Rosie
I'd say he's runner up.
Yeah.
Bucky's runner up.
Bucky's stealing the show so far. In terms of an actor coming out of nowhere, it feels like it's his show now. That's what it feels like.
Oh yeah, I mean, I do think he's the central figure of the show, especially now that Cleven's not, at least not with us on screen. I hope maybe he's somewhere in Germany. I don't know.
It did very much feel like when Cleven was in the picture, that Cleven had more gravitas than Bucky.
Yeah, he felt center stage. Yeah.
Yeah, he felt exactly like you just said it there. But now, because the show is not necessarily, I think that's one of the things that these guys probably talked about in the writer's room. If I had to guess, they were probably like, hey, the show's not about Bucky and Buck. It's about every single one of these guys who played a role in here. So we don't want it to, in my opinion, it seems like they're trying to show the show as like a, not anecdotal. What am I trying to say here? It's looking at snapshots of different historical figures who were part of this group. It's not just Buck and Bucky and their friendship. That's just one element of it. But you get Crosby, you get Bubbles, you get
everybody played a part.
Kurt Biddick, everybody, exactly. So everybody's kind of had. You have Quinn, all these different stories that all are centrally around this group, the 100th. So
yeah,
absolutely.
Favorite line of the episode?
I finally got one, and it's Crosby's. It's when he says, "The hardest part of any mission was the anticipation." That was my favorite line.
That's a good one.
Resonated the most with me.
I just went with my mic drop line that I kind of liked from Bucky, though it was insensitive. It was just it's war. We're here to drop bombs. It was just I don't know. Kind of it stood out to me at the very least.
I do think that if you're in that situation, you do have to find a way to turn off that part of your brain. That is thinking, that is making equivalent what you're doing compared to the evil forces.
Otherwise, you're going to second guess everything you do,
and you're going to drive yourself insane with guilt.
That's true. Yeah, that's very true. You know, that was the last category I have, but one of the closing thoughts that I kind of had about the episode and the show, you had mentioned earlier, like you wish we kind of had this snapshot of like, where are we in the war?
Yes.
I feel like we're intentionally not going to have that, because I would imagine every guy here, everybody here has no freaking clue. They have no idea if the factory they bombed is helping anything. They have no idea if the railroad they bombed is slowing down, Germany in any way. So like I imagine like it's kind of just a way to make us kind of feel like they probably felt, in real life to some degree. Like obviously it's really hard to make all of that come across on television, but I don't think anybody there really knew, except maybe the higher ups. Like maybe they know, but they don't have a ton of screen time.
Yeah, I'd have to say the same. It's a creative choice, right?
Yeah,
to play it this way, because you could easily have a narrator come in and be like, the 100th played their pivotal role on this mission, or would have
like a video game. Yeah.
You could have that sort of thing, but I think it's creatively, I would have made the same choice. Put us in the position of these soldiers. That's the reason we don't have closure with Buck, because if you're in the situation of these guys, you wouldn't have any clue whether Buck was alive, whether he was dead, whether he was POW. Because you saw how shaky those logs are. You're in the middle of a gunfight. You're focused on trying to stay alive.
Who's paying attention?
The plane next to you.
If
you happen to look in that direction, you might see it.
That's about it. Like that, the fact that people took logs like that, honestly, was I think probably one of the most surprising parts of this show to me. I was like, dude, how on earth are you writing that down? Like that's a role that somebody had to play. Like I never thought about that, but I mean, I guess we had to do that to kind of have a track record of, what's going on, who's down, who might be alive, who do we maybe need to send a rescue mission after or something like that. But it's just 100%. Not something that you like actively think about,
Yeah. By the way, you have your episode screenshot right there on screen.
Oh yeah, I know. That's why I haven't changed the spot this time. Like I got to it and I'm like, oh, that's a good frame. I'm gonna save that for the screenshot. Yeah, absolutely.
We're thinking on the same page. Yeah, all right. Well, the show's looking good. It's definitely a must watch on Apple TV. For anyone listening out there who's happened to catch this before watching episodes 1 through 4, it's definitely a must watch. Stop what you're doing this weekend. Get yourself a good meal or two. Sit down and crank out 4 episodes. You won't regret it. All right. In other news. What else is on TV? I sporadically started watching True Detective Night Country. Okay, I'm doing a series on that right now. So far solo. I have pushed Zach to watch the show with me. He is, although in the middle of his Game of Thrones coverage, so I understand. Well, he's not covering it, but
I'm
He is in the
absorbing
middle
it.
of yeah, we do owe the audience a full Game of Thrones retrospective episode at the end of your journey of
Oh,
watching Game
boy.
of Thrones. We'll
All
do
right.
that. We have to. Zach, there has to be some
We
ROI
have to do something. Yeah.
on
No,
8 straight episodes.
I get you.
Okay.
8 straight
All right.
seasons.
Yeah, we don't have to go in depth. We do a good job at the high level, summary.
Mhm.
Kind of looking at things from a 3,000 foot view. But yeah, I started watching True Detective Night Country. If you want Zach to join me on that, so it's not a solo pod, email us at contact@soapbox.house and call him out. If we get 10 emails calling out Zach, he has to stop what he's doing and watch True Detective. That's fair, right, Zach?
That's fair. Yeah, if 10 people tell me to do it, I'll do it.
He's like, please, God. No.
Yeah, I mean, I really want to get through Game of Thrones, but if you're going to do it to me, I mean, I'll do it. Like, we do this for you, so come on.
Yeah.
If it's what you want, let us know.
Anyways, we have only one episode on that so far. I covered episode 1. I haven't even watched episode 2. I'm avoiding corresponding with the YouTube commenters because some have dropped spoilers or at least opinions on what goes on later. So I'm avoiding that. So if you're going to email, don't message me anything about what's occurred later because I'll just ignore it until the end of the season and then get back to you. Other than that, it's fantastic. Jodie Foster's great. True Detective's good. I'm not a diehard True Detective fan, but Night Country's hitting the right notes for me in the gloomy detective genre. So check it out if you want to see the coverage and follow along with us. It is on every platform that we're on, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And as always, if you like the pod, like in this series, like this video, rate us 5 stars on Apple or Spotify, and email us. We always love hearing from you guys. So I think that's all I got. In terms of other things on TV this weekend, Apple TV just dropped a new docuseries on the Patriots, the New England Patriots dynasty. I believe they dropped it today. And is there anything else that I've been watching?
I mean, I was planning to watch an episode of Criminal Record and the New Look. Like, they look pretty interesting, but
they do. Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see what I can. I mean, I can only watch so much, so
I like the actor in New Look. So I'm intrigued. Arya's in there too. Arya Stark. So.
That's what I thought. I was like, God, I know her. I thought it was her, but I didn't look it up. So
girl
thank
has
you.
no name. It's kind of tough to tell when you look at the credits.
Well, I mean, I didn't look at the credits. I was just
it's a girl has no name. It wouldn't have shown.
Oh well, I mean, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you wouldn't find it very easily. Yeah. Well, anyways,
that's a game. That's a Game of Thrones reference, not a sexist comment. Anyways,
yeah, yeah. Good thing you classified that.
Yeah. All right, Zach, to the outro.
For sure. Well, thank you for listening to this episode of Masters of the Air by Story Archives. You can find this podcast anywhere you find podcasts, Apple and Spotify podcasts primarily. You can visit us on YouTube at Soapbox Podcast Network. You can visit our website at soapbox.house. Email us at contact@soapbox.house. And we do have a link in the description below to sign up for our quarterly newsletter.
Until next time, y'all, have a good weekend. Happy President's Day, wherever you are. Go out there, touch some grass, get some sun. Peace.